Breaking news, new soft curfew to follow in the BVI once the current lockdown is lifted.
Social Security Board reassigned to Labor Minister and BVI Citizens can return home 30 days after curfew is lifted. These and more stories when 284 News returns.
Is business slow, cash flow down, hosting an upcoming event? We can help. Advertise with 284 Media and take your business or event to the next level by enhancing your present marketing and messaging strategies. Allow our team of experts to create a personalized ad that sets your business apart from all the rest. This could be your business or event. So, what are you waiting for? Contact our marketing team at 284media@cctbvi.com. Advertising with us works.
Welcome everybody. It's Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. I'm Ron Grant.
And I am Javon Wilson. Another beautiful week here in the British Virgin Islands. Now, Ron, as we speak, the territory remains on a 24-hour lockdown. And I know a lot of persons have really questioned how will we be released from this lockdown. Not only are we excited to get out, but also we do not want to retard the amazing efforts of the government of the Virgin Islands so far, as well as the health officials who have been working collectively to effectively contain the virus. Well, today, Minister Carvin Malone, in speaking with international media, revealed that a soft curfew will follow once this one is completed. Let's watch.
Well, in terms of the 24-hour curfew, we have a particular condition where it is now being mandated until the 19th, but we're going to call it 6 a.m. on the 20th. And then we would go into a 12 or 13-hour soft curfew. During the day, we'll try to reintroduce the critical businesses, and then after the first 7 days, try to introduce more of the businesses. So we'd have internal movements only. Our borders will remain closed.
So, Ron, a few things to go over here. Big revelation there from the Honorable Minister Carvin Malone. Now, the first thing we want to clarify is that the current lockdown that we're on, which supposedly ends on the 19th of April, will be lifted actually on April 20th. Correct. Now, I know a lot of persons are thinking that they will be able to get out on the 19th, and definitely looking forward to that. But according to the minister, the curfew will be lifted at 6 a.m. on April 20th, yes. As well as we see a soft curfew coming into effect following this current lockdown. The minister is saying it will be a 12 to 13 hours, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., depending on what is cemented in the next week to come. We're also looking at the first week. Only critical businesses will be allowed to open. So I'm guessing in this case that may mean our essential services, our supermarkets, and so on, so that persons can get out and replenish exactly what they need. And of course, they can get the relevant help that they need. And we see in the following week, just about a week after, more businesses will be permitted to open. So I know many countries across the world similarly, and across the region especially, have been looking at ways to release persons from the lockdown. We just want to be able to, ensure that once persons are out and about, we do not contribute to a community spread.
Jovan, I think what the Minister of Health and the government of the Virgin Islands is doing with the phased approach, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
Obviously, there is excitement and anticipation as to when the territory will be able to go back to normalcy, but I do appreciate their subtlety in kind of reintegrating us back to that step, so kudos to them.
You know, Ron, I've been speaking to reporters in the region, and one of the things they're applauding the BVI for is the stringent approach to lockdown. I think it really has complemented our ability to contain the virus. Our health officials are on the front line, and persons are seemingly, with this new client services center in place to ensure that persons are monitored under quarantine. It seems like we have a pretty good handle on things
and
on the health sector.
Definitely.
All right, viewers, we're going to head into our first story for today. About $12,000 worth of medical supplies in transit to the BVI to aid in the fight against COVID-19 has been seized by U.S. authorities. The order was made by BVI Health Services. It was confiscated in Miami under the recent Trump administration order to prevent the export of N95 respirators, surgical masks, gloves, and other personal protective equipment from the U.S. The Minister of Health, Carvin Malone, is now looking to the Governor of the Virgin Islands, His Excellency J.U. Jaspert, for a resolve. Let's listen in.
Yes, I can report that I've been advised by the Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Georges, that a shipment of medical supplies, PPEs, basically comprising of N95 masks, gloves, and gowns, have been held by the U.S. Customs or U.S. officials under the order issued by the United States. I have since reported the incident to the governor, who would, through diplomatic channels, be able to find ways in which we can get the goods released. It was a $12,000 order, so not much in the whole scheme of things, but we want to make sure that we have a clear path to purchases for medical replacement supplies through the United States, and we would be grateful if this could be handled effectively by the UK government and the US government. So I see no issue in terms of it getting or being resolved.
Now, Ron, that voice note was sent out during the course of last week. We would have reached out to the minister for an updated response, but up to press time, none was provided. We did, however, manage to get some feedback from the governor, His Excellency J.U. Jaspert, who said, quote, "I can confirm that the U.S. Custom and Border Protection have seized medical supplies bound for the BVI. The Ministry of Health have sought assistance from my office on this matter, and we are working to resolve with utmost urgency using diplomatic channels." Now, Ron, this is, as we can see, not an isolated case in the BVI. Multiple countries, as a matter of fact,
all across the
have,
region.
yes, have accused the Trump administration of unfairly acquiring equipment necessary for fighting the ongoing coronavirus outbreak through what we're calling Wild West methods. Now we can look at Barbados. Just recently in the headlines, 20 ventilators were seized in transit to Barbados. We can look over at the Cayman Islands as well, 8 ventilators, as well as 50,000 masks was seized for the Cayman Islands. We also look even within the United States. What we're seeing, Ron, is a new trend, seeing the United States outbidding countries who would have ordered stuff or equipment from China. Just recently, a shipment from China to France was intercepted when the U.S. basically boldly, Ron, outbid France times 3, and of course offering monies up front. We also look even within the state of America. States within America are fighting against each other. We see governors petitioning for supplies, and there's this back and forth on who deserves it and where the priority rests. So Germany, France, Brazil, the Cayman Islands, Bahamas, Barbados, and now the BVI, all accusing the United States of low-down modern piracy of the much-needed supplies to fight COVID-19. Now, viewers, a spokesperson for U.S. Customs and Border Protection confirmed to international news media that the agency is working with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is FEMA, to prevent distributors from diverting personal equipment or PPE such as face masks, gloves overseas. Ventilators are also on that list. So, Ron, as the situation continues to worsen on the international scene, we see the U.S. really taking strong, crucial measures to ensure that those supplies stay within the United States, which we know have now become the epicenter of the novel coronavirus.
Jovan, it is absolutely a state of emergency and a state of survival. It is shocking to see this happening, but as you said earlier, all across the region, other Caribbean islands are experiencing this same thing. It shows you the extent and the level of desperation that we're facing across the globe as it pertains to COVID-19, but it's definitely not accepted, and I do hope that the Governor of the Virgin Islands, His Excellency Governor Augustus Jasper, will be able to assist to his best in this regard.
The good news is, out of the Cayman Islands, we read headlines about 100 persons had to petition
Yes.
to ensure that those products were released. And that's frightening just to hear about 100 persons, inclusive of government officials. So again, we do trust that some amount of relief will come in our situation,
Indeed.
because we're a small territory and we certainly need our supplies.
Most definitely. And moving right along, in another shift within the government of the Virgin Islands through its cabinet, the cabinet of the Virgin Islands, has reassigned the responsibility of the Social Security Board to the Honorable Vincent Wheatley, Minister of Natural Resources, Labor and Immigration and 9th District Representative. The responsibility was previously held by the present Deputy Premier and Minister of Health and Social Development, the Honorable Carvin Malone. Now, this swap in portfolio was officially made during a recent cabinet meeting. The public order paper dated April 3rd stated that the Governor of the Virgin Islands, Augustus Jasper, based on the advice of the Premier and Minister of Finance, the Honorable Andrew A. Foy, and published in the Gazette of April 9th, believed that the change is in law with plans to consolidate labor-related responsibilities, as the Social Security Board largely serves self-employed persons, employees, and employers. This modification is provided by Section 56, Number 1 of the Virgin Islands Constitution Order, 2007, that the Governor, acting in accordance with the advice of the Premier, may be in direction within writing assigned to any minister responsibility for the conduct of any business, including responsibility for the administration of any department of government. Now, Jovan, many residents agree that the Social Security Board should be under the Labor Minister. This is largely due to the fact that the Social Security Board has been a hot topic recently, as residents continue to look for answers as to what a stimulus package will be presented to the territory. Particularly, residents are concerned as to the number of unemployed persons within the Virgin Islands due to COVID-19, with a focus on the hospitality industry as well as small businesses. They are simply seeking answers as to how such persons will be able to continue to provide for their families, and many residents seem to be have been of the mind that the Social Security Board, believe it or not, would come to their aid. Now, the board, through its chairman and director, have since stated that there is no legislation to support assistance for the unemployed by the board, as if the already existing portfolio is not tall enough for the Minister of Natural Resources and Labor. Minister Wheatley is now tasked with overseeing the Social Security Board's annual budget and projects, including the highly anticipated $11 million housing project, which included the design and building of 43 residential units at Joes Hill. This is not the first time the Foy-led administration has made portfolio swaps since first reassigning various ministerial posts after being elected. In 2019, Premier and Minister of Finance, the Honorable Andrew Foy, announced the reassignment of portfolios for at-large Representative Honorable Shireen Flax-Charles to Junior Minister of Trade and Economic Development, and Honorable Shari DeCastro to Junior Minister of Tourism. Jovan, we continue, of course, to wish our government the very best in their endeavors. I think for anyone maneuvering through these very tough times cannot be an easy task.
Certainly, and the alignment is important, Ron. The thing is, we are dealing with an unprecedented crisis,
Indeed.
and I think the more we are in alignment, the better it is for our government officials to figure out what's best for the territory. Now, I'm glad you mentioned the breakdown with the industries and the Minister of Labor having to overlook this new portfolio, simply because when we think about the breakdown of our economy, a lot of persons fall within the hospitality and small businesses sector, and because we are a private sector economy, and most of those businesses being shut down and now a lot of persons being laid off, what is going to happen is the government will now have to figure out how to basically take care of the needs of those people, and that's the predicament that we currently find ourselves in.
Well, Jovan, it is indeed the government's responsibility in many regards. They have been elected to serve and to assist, and we hope to see some sort of reprise as the few weeks arise, so persons can have a level of comfort, I think, and in knowing that some assistance will be given to them. Now, still ahead, mourning the loss of a loved one during COVID-19. A look at what that looks like for Virgin Islanders and BVI Landers overseas. Some of them will finally get a chance to return home after the 30-day curfew is lifted. All this and more when 284 News returns.
Some claim that the age of a true gentleman is far behind us, but here at 284 Media, we disagree. He may appear in different guises today, but the values and ideals that make him a gent still stand. 284 Media proudly presents its newest talk show, The Art of a Distinguished Gentleman, with yours truly, Ron Grant. A show poised to help guide modern-day men into 21st century distinguished gentlemen. Don't worry, it's not all about suits and bow ties, but raw, real-life lessons that translate to grounded, community-minded, well-rounded men. The Art of a Distinguished Gentleman, a 284 Media production.
Viewers, welcome back to 284 News. Now, the Minister of Health and Social Development, Honorable Carvin Malone, has announced that Virgin Islanders residing overseas will be able to return home in about 1 month's time in a staggered approach. This was revealed in an interview with regional media. The minister said that once the curfew is lifted at 6 a.m. on April 20th, the borders will remain closed to incoming passengers. However, after 30 days, BVI citizens will have the opportunity to return. Let's watch.
After the 30-day period, where we have 12 hours on and 12 hours at night under curfew, we would then be able to look in terms of reintroducing our citizens and our belongings and other persons into the territory. But this will have to be done in a phased approach so that we can have the proper quarantined time so that we do not retard, again, the progress that we've made over the few weeks and 2 months that we would have been looking at.
Ron, welcome news for so many persons across the territory.
Indeed.
And of course our citizens across the world. Now this comes on the heels of many locals being locked out, like we said, in light of the government's sudden decision to close borders on March 22nd at 11:59 p.m. As we know, a lot of persons were stuck in other countries, some in transit in the USVI with little to no notice of a border closure, leading many to question if government can lock out their citizens. And if yes, Ron, what are the legal ramifications? Go ahead.
Jovan, I think in any crisis, the government of the day usually tries their best to do, and I think it's unfortunate for many residents. I know they were disappointed that they could not have returned when they would have liked, but I do think that the government of the Virgin Islands was making its best efforts in making sure that the borders were secured. A lot of the success that the Virgin Islands has seen as it pertains to the fight against COVID-19 really has to be attributed to the swift action of not only the closure of the cruise ships and closing that down, but our borders. And I think as daunting as it would have been for many persons to not be able to come back home, and we ourselves not being able to see our families and wanting them to be as close to us as possible, definitely it was a decision that had to be made.
It certainly complemented the reality that we have now, those numbers down from 3 to 1 with 2 cases recovered. But a lot of persons were very worried about not being able to return home. I personally know of a few persons who are in vulnerable positions just across the region. A lot of our students were in dorms. Dorms were closing at universities, so they literally had no place to go. Not only that, but they were exposed in regions where there were high infection rates in those territories. I know in one instance as well, our Minister of Education, Natalia Whitley, he was forced to charter home about 4 students from those very regions that we're speaking about. However, scores of residents have complained about not being able, like you said, to have their family home in such a crucial time. And that's 4 students were able to come back, but the BVI has many students across the world. Many of our family and friends live across the world. So it will be interesting to see the approach. The minister mentioned that it will be staggered somewhat, but clearly, definitely will be happening once the curfew, 30 days after that curfew is lifted. But I guess it will be interesting to see how many can we bring in at a time, especially since those persons will be, it will be mandatory for those persons to be placed under quarantine as we continue to monitor the situation.
And again, this process has to be timely, it has to be efficient in order to us to continue our stance in doing as well as we have as it pertains to COVID-19. Moving right along, mourning amidst COVID-19. It doesn't matter when or where, losing a loved one is by far one of the hardest things in life for any individual or family to experience. Well, imagine having to endure such sorrow amid COVID-19. Many families across the globe, including us right here locally, are grappling with the loss of a loved one, laying them to rest, all while trying to stay safe during COVID-19. I took the opportunity to sit down with the local Methodist preacher and owner of the Davis Funeral Home, Dr. Robert Wright, to discuss exactly what the grieving process looks like for persons in the Virgin Islands and what it will look like going forward. Take a look.
You said lost a loved one in the midst of this pandemic, because I want to make it clear, by the grace of God and the efforts of our government, we have not lost anybody directly to COVID-19. And I think that's a blessing, and the distinction must be clear. On the other hand, we've had numerous deaths during the epidemic, during the lockdown. One of the things that we have to realize is this pandemic has affected everyone in every area of every aspect of their life. When you lose somebody, usually I've heard stories of families gathered around the hospital bedside, or somebody dies at home. These things are no longer part of the new normal.
Wow.
If somebody dies from COVID-19 or dies away from their loved ones, that death is now a lonely one. They are by themselves. If somebody dies in your home, in the old days when we went to pick up a body, sometimes the family would be surrounding them. With the new pandemic rules and regulations of gatherings and social distancing, you can't even go hold your mother's hand in the midst of all that needs to be done. Just to let you know, and I'm afraid that is I'm not immune to it either. I have a 93-year-old mother living in Brooklyn, New York. God forbid if I get the call today or tomorrow, I can't even go, because
Indeed.
I'd have to be quarantined in St. Thomas or Puerto Rico, and then another 14 days in New York. It has affected every area of life.
Now, Jovan, the staff at Davis Funeral Home also underwent some recent training from the Dr. D. Orlando Smith Hospital to better help them serve during these times. Director Wright also spoke to the extent of this training. Listen in.
We noticed that your staff recently received some training from the Dr. D. Orlando Smith Hospital. Can you tell me in depth as to what exactly that training was about?
Basically, it was about the new procedures, how to protect ourselves and protect the public. It was very good in some sense, from the simple, like washing of the hands. I'm 60 years old. I've been washing my hands for years, but I learned a new way to do it as far as the knuckles, the thumb, all the areas in between the web. It was in that sense. But it also was problematic because in order, as I told you a little earlier, they now expect us to seal off every orifice of a dead body. I just can't send the guys who've been transporting the bodies out to do that. I now have to bring the embalmers out additionally. This also becomes a cost to me as a businessman. I'm not saying I can't do it. That cost now has to be passed on. On top of that, some of the stuff we need to do the job, the suits, the uniforms, this, that, and the other, we're competing with the world in trying to get those things here.
Agreed,
My
understood.
suppliers in Puerto Rico, in Florida, are saying, brother, you know, we want to help you, but these things are in demand all over the world. Nobody has an unlimited supply. The ports are closed. We have to have government procedure to bring things in. It's not about the money. And in a way, it is about the money, because even if I want to order stuff, the banks are closed.
All right.
So
How
it
are
comes
you?
down
How are you
to
and your?
a challenge that we.
How are you and your staff maneuvering some of those challenges that you just spoke about?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
That's an honest answer. We are going to be working Tuesday to embalm the bodies. But once we do that, as I spoke to earlier, our morgue is full. Something has to be done with the bodies there. I have a tourist from Canada who wants to be cremated, but got to us before the lockdown. What can I tell her family? There's nothing I could do for them. And this has been now almost a month until we get the release to do something. And then it's not only us, because Puerto Rico has to accept. St. Croix has to accept. There's where the crematoriums are. These things have to be looked into. So how we're adapting, I don't know. My staff, as always, they deserve 3 times the pay. But things being what they are, they remain dedicated and loyal to the vision of what we have to do, which is serve the families. My wife and I didn't get into this to make money. Every business wants money, but we are doing it to serve, and that has to come first.
Now, Jovan, of course, Dr. Wright spoke to a lot of the challenges that they're facing in the fight against COVID-19, not because of persons losing their life as a result of COVID-19, but just deaths, and the fact that all across the globe, particularly regionally, a lot of the equipment that they would use are in extremely high demand. Now, for the full length of the video, persons can check out our Facebook page at 284 Media on Facebook. We here at 284 News continue to wish all residents safety during these times, more so for those in a similar situation who have lost a loved one. You are in our thoughts and prayers. Now, still ahead, new declaration by governor to house prison inmates in local hotel. This and more when 284 News returns.
How may I assist you? You want top of power?
You want top of power?
Join the prepaid party with CCT and enjoy more affordable data plans, more top-up promotions, more savings with hero bundles, and more value for your money each and every Tuesday with Top Up Turn Up Tuesday. Visit a CCT store today or anywhere CCT Top Up is sold and top up your phone.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. You want top of power?
Viewers, welcome back. For a number of years, there has been reports of overcrowding at Her Majesty's Prison in Balsam Gut, Tortola, BVI. In 2017, Superintendent of the state facility, David Foote, had declared that the prison was operating at maximum capacity, and at the time stated that the situation had reached a critical level. As a result, the prison has been pushing for rehabilitation of inmates to alleviate the overcrowding and encourage persons and inmates to be reintegrated into society. In the recovery and reintegration process, persons are helping them throughout the community to get jobs and get back into a working class, such as Davis Funeral Home, whom we just spoke to earlier. Now, on April 9th, 2020, Governor of the Virgin Islands, in a declaration received by our newsroom, stated that space has now been sought and secured to house inmates outside of Her Majesty's prison. The declaration reads, whereas it is provided by Section 4A of the Prison Ordinance, Cap number 166, that the governor may, by proclamation, publish in the Gazette, declare any place to be a prison. Now, therefore, by virtue and in the exercise of the powers vested in me, I, Augustus J.U. Jasper, Governor of the Virgin Islands, do hereby proclaim and declare rooms 110 to 116 at the property known as Paradise Hotel in Roadtown, Tortola, to be a prison, and all Her Majesty's officers and all other required to take note thereto and govern themselves accordingly, given under my hand and the public seal of the Virgin Islands this 9th day of April 2020 and in this 69th year of Her Majesty's reign. Now, we'll have more on this story, Jovan, but it comes as a surprise, believe it or not, to many residents that inmates are going to be housed in the center of Roadtown. Again, we don't know the depth of it and we don't know the extent of how long it will be for, but this is the case, and the Governor of the Virgin Islands are keeping us informed and allowing residents to be guided accordingly.
Well, certainly this was a long time coming. We've
Yes.
been overcrowded for quite a number of years, and this is something we were looking into. I know in light of the curfew, just about 30 persons were arrested. Now, not all of those persons were apprehended.
Correct.
What we've heard is some were arrested, some were reported on, documented, and told that they will be prosecuted at a later date, and that is in light of a shortage of space at the various police force
Correct.
locations. So it just goes to show that there is a shortage of space. And in light of the whole coronavirus phase two, I think one of the things we want to look in term, if we're going to look at long-term investments, is the fact that the prison is already crowded, and
Yeah,
we have
stretched.
to examine the possibility of an outbreak within the prison. And so making space is very important. According to the press release, there are just about 6 rooms. Might not be enough for what we're trying to cater to
Correct.
on a long term, but certainly a step in the right direction. I think the big question here is why that building specifically, and why in the middle of Roadtown?
Of Roadtown, indeed.
Viewers, that is it for today's news roundup. You can follow us for daily news updates at 284media.com, and you can also like us on Facebook at 284media as well as 284BVI, on Instagram as well as Twitter. It was my pleasure. My name is Javon Wilson.
And I'm Ron Grant. We'll see you again tomorrow as we deliver your daily dose of local, regional, and international content. We do hope that each and every one of you had a wonderful Easter weekend spent with your family, and now we're heading into our last week of a lockdown. 284 News, your source for honest and impartial news right here on 284 Media. Happy Tuesday, everybody.